If somebody made a computer that was half the price, twice as fast, and used half the power so it lasted twice as long, would that be something you were interested in? Let's talk about it. G'day everybody, how are you going today? It is so very good to see you. Yes, we have a little bit of the Apple keynote playing in the background here for a very specific reason. Today I want to talk about something that is not a camera, it's not a photograph, it's not a lens, and it's not controversy. I just needed to have a change, and the reality is that computers are a massive part of photographers' lives and have been for, well, I suppose a bit of a turning point might have been when Photoshop was first invented in the early 1990s. And then once we got to digital photography, there was no escaping that really computers were as big a part of our photographic lives as our cameras, in the sense of some people probably spend as much time holding their mouse in their hand and working on their computer as they do holding their camera in their hand. I don't want this to turn into a brand war. I have no interest in brand wars. I made the decision to use Apple when my parents made that decision for me. I was 10 years old, I think, when the first Apple II clone came into my life. And then I purchased my first Apple, I think it was in 1993 or 1994, and it cost me an arm and a leg. And I got it for a specific set of reasons. I was creating photos and images and doing graphic design, and before Windows 1995 we were working with Windows 3.1, and it was an easier decision back in the 90s. And then there's a whole lot of reasons, but I don't want to get into a war, because it's not about better or worse, it's about use case. And it's absolutely use case driven as to why I chose Apple. And it continues to be today. Although I think some of the use case reasons are much less relevant in 2020 than they were when I made these decisions in the 90s. Maybe something has happened in 2020 which is use case related, and it's right here, what's going on in the screen behind me, and they are talking about the new Apple M1 chip. Now, what's so exciting about this chip, and what's so exciting for content creators like you and me, is this chip is ridiculously powerful and it uses a very small amount of power. And for photographers who might often be on the road and in the field using their laptops, the more CPU cycles you can get per watt of power, the better. Absolutely the better. So the M1 chip is a bit of a massive step. Now, and I think it's terrifically relevant to content creators, people who are working with images that might be 20, 40, 60 megapixels, and people who are using video that's 1080p or 4K or even 8K. You really want to get as much bang for your buck when it comes to power usage versus clock cycles and output. Now, I've waited a couple of weeks to talk about this because the benchmarks are starting to come in, and they're coming in from a lot of different sources. Some really big names, some reputable names have done testing. And the reality is these chips are completely meeting Apple's claims. They are ridiculously fast and they are using much less power. And these are coming in tiny packages. One benchmark I saw, and I can't remember whether it was with one of the two laptops or the Mac Mini, and these are ultra cheap in Apple terms, entry-level machines, and it was outperforming the iMac Pro, which is something like 3 to 4 times the price, a couple of years old, but these machines are outperforming it. and in some cases they don't even have fans. They don't get particularly hot. The Mac Mini and the MacBook Pro, the little one, they have fans, but the smallest one, the MacBook Air, it does not. So is this a bit of a paradigm shift? Now, Apple are not the only people to be using ARM processors. They're not. Windows, Microsoft, they have a version of their operating system that runs on this very processor, which it's believed, it's possible, because they've got an ARM-based version of Windows, that it could possibly in the future, if Microsoft choose to make a version for Apple's chip, it would be possible that ultimately these machines are cross-platform, as the Intel ones have been for the last 15 or so years. Just as a sidestep, I was actually at the keynote in San Francisco when Apple made the announcement that they had been working on a version of Mac OS, and they'd been prototyping Macs on Intel, and they were going to be rolling to Intel. And that was just, that was a massive moment. It's the only keynote that I'd ever been to. Steve Jobs was there. It was just it was a great day. It was a great day, and it was a great announcement. And it blew everybody's minds in the room. Absolutely blew all of our minds. And they've done it again with this. I mean, this is a massive step. What are the cons? Well, I suppose the single biggest con is that the software that you have, that you're used to using, won't be supported. And ultimately, perhaps the developer just doesn't want to do it, can't be bothered, whatever. I kind of feel ultimately that's unlikely. If someone has a piece of successful software that people use, they spend money on, then it's in the developer's interests to keep developing and to work on the M1 chip. That's part one. Part two is Rosetta 2. Now, Rosetta is an emulation shell where the software runs in that emulator on the M1 chip. And basically, the bottom line seems to be that your applications run at similar speeds, even in emulation mode, once on an M1 chip. So Apple have got this covered. I remember the transition from PowerPC through to Intel, and they used the original version of Rosetta, and it all worked pretty well. It was sort of like 95% good and a few things bad. But that's okay. Nothing is perfect in life. We know that. I do think that for us content creators, this is a massive thing. I do think we're going to be actually getting more bang for our buck, because the entry-level machines have now become somewhere around twice as powerful overnight. Adobe have already released a beta version of Photoshop for the M1 chip, so Adobe are completely on board. All of their suite of applications will be coming across to the M1. Now that's a massive thing. So many people use Photoshop, Lightroom, InDesign, Premiere, and so on. Obviously, Apple are have already optimized and are continuing to optimize, because I'm sure it doesn't all get completely optimized overnight. It will take a while, but they have native M1 versions of things like Final Cut Pro and so on. So for me, as a content creator, to be able to get this much more power, and it's so ridiculously affordable, there's two parts to this. Like, I can basically buy a Mac Mini, and by the sounds of it, it's more powerful than the iMac I have here behind me. And that machine's 3 years old. And for half the price, or even less, I've already got a machine that's more powerful, significantly more powerful. So this leaves me to wondering, what are the Pro machines going to be like? Well, like, what's the replacement of this one going to be like? It's 3 years old, as I just said. There's already this is a 4-core, there's already 8-core and 10-core machines. They're already quite a lot faster than this one. If I was to get an M1, or maybe they'll have an M2 or an M3 chip, more powerful chip, it's going to be a significant jump. It might be a 2 or 3 or 4 times in real world jump from this investment, which has pretty much amortized itself at this point in time, to whatever might happen in 2021. I think probably 2021-ish sometime, I'd say it's the second half of 2021, we'll see these things being replaced. It's ridiculous, and it's really going to have a massive impact on my workflow because, you know, I'm using 60 megapixel files and 46 megapixel files from the Z7 and the D850s, the Hasselblad 60 megapixels, the Sony A7R is 42 megapixels, and working with those files is a little bit slower than working with, say, the Z6 or the Z6 II's files, which are 24 megapixels. I want to see a bit of a speed up. And when I actually enjoy working on the Z6's files because it's snappier. It's the computer's got basically half the content, half the information to throw around. And I enjoy working in that faster pace. So it's going to make a big change. And then also in the editing space, there is real time wasted in watching the computer render out transitions and color grades and all that sort of thing, but there's also real time wasted. If I do a 4K 25-minute video, you know, that can take anywhere from 17 minutes to half an hour, depending on what I've done in it. Anything that improves that, like I've just gone, my broadband's changed from being slow uploads to fast uploads. It's made a profound difference in my world, those fast uploads. So yeah, this is a big deal. If you're a Mac user, it's going to make a big difference to your speed and your workflow. This is a profound shift, the first profound shift we've had from Apple in over a decade, whilst they've been with Intel. And before that, it was it a decade? Around a decade. It's sort of 10-year or 15-year sort of cycles. And this is a generational shift. And what's most interesting about this is that these chips are from the iPhone. Their original versions are from the iPhone and the iPad. And so another advantage, which some people may think is an advantage or not, is that these chips, because they're in the iPhone and the iPad, it means you natively can run iPhone and iPad software. So it's quite an ecosystem Apple's building. I think there's a lot of upside. As I said, really the only downside is software compatibility. But if it's good quality software that lots of people use and buy, it is in the developer's interest to upgrade it to the ARM processor, the M1 and whatever else happens. So I'm super excited to see what the pro versions of these machines are going to do. I think they're going to blow our minds because these machines are already really impressing people. Bang for buck and power, CPU power for power consumption, they are delivering. This is not hyperbole. Very exciting. It's very exciting times. And look, if you're a PC user, look, it's really interesting times. And Microsoft rely on Intel, but there's nothing stopping Microsoft from making the same sorts of moves. As I already said, there's an ARM processor version of Windows exists. So Microsoft could go down this path as well. So this is something that could be of benefit. And knowing Microsoft, you know, they're so massive that they will continue to make Intel versions of Windows, and they will make other versions of Windows as they have done in the past for various platforms. So this Apple in this particular case, Apple might drive the major operating systems onto these faster moving processors. ARM is a RISC chip. It stands for Reduced Instruction Set, and that just means they move a bit quicker. But look, Apple are doing some other magic here that they talk about, like the fact that there's system on a chip, an SoC. The entire system is on one chip, and even the RAM, it's all on the 1.5 nanometer die. So Apple have done quite a lot of things at once. They're putting basically everything that a computer is, which normally used to be a motherboard of things, they've put a great deal of that motherboard of things on one chip, which means that one chip, all of it can talk really quickly. Now, there's still a bit of a motherboard with other things, but they're putting a lot of the really essential stuff in one spot, which you would have seen on the graphics here behind me. So that in itself creates the speed and efficiencies. Also, the 5 nanometer process creates speed and efficiencies. And the fact that the ARM chips are a RISC chip also creates efficiencies. So you put all these things together, which they've done at once, and the M1 chip is what we're getting in our desktops for the first time in the Mac space. It's very exciting. And look, it's exciting because of, I think, just the power, and there's a whole lot of other technology like the neural engines and the fact that the processors are 8-core and the CPUs are 8 cores, and there's a lot going on in these chips. And I think we're still yet to fully discover and understand and for that to be leveraged. But there's no rush. Really, what I wanted to do was just to let you know, in case you'd missed this information, that I think it's going to be great for content creators, photographers, filmmakers, etc., etc. It is going to be great for us, and we are going to get faster outcomes. And you may not realize it, but as a photographer, if you've got a 40 megapixel camera, you're pushing a lot of data around, and anything that makes that more efficient is good. More time for photography, less time sitting in front of the computer. I think that's good. So everybody, I'd love to know, what do you think about the M1 chip? What do you think about what Apple's up to here? What do you think about the collision between iOS and macOS? Now again, before we jump into the comments, this is not brand related. This is not a question of something versus something. But what do you think? Is Apple heading in the right direction? Is this technology that you're going to use? All right, it has been so good to see you. And if this is your first time here, so lovely to meet you. I'd love to see you again, so please subscribe, please share, please like, and I will see you all very soon. And we can talk about the M1 some more. All right, see ya.